All right, strap in everyone, because today we are launching into a deep dive on rocket yoga. When you first sent me your notes, I have to admit the name alone, it really had me intrigued. Rocket yoga. It just sounds like it's going to be a wild ride.
It certainly is a very dynamic style, but it's also a lot more approachable than you might think. What's fascinating to me about rocket yoga is that it isn't some, ancient practice shrouded in mystery. It was actually developed pretty recently in the 1980s by a yogi named Larry Schultz.
Oh, okay, so definitely not what I was expecting. I was picturing something, ancient and traditional.
Right. It's a relatively modern take on yoga, but what's cool is that Schultz was really heavily influenced by Ashtanga yoga, but he really wanted to create a style that was more accessible and, like the name suggests, could help people progress faster.
So it's like a fast track to yoga mastery.
Well, I don't know about mastery, but it definitely emphasizes a quicker pace and incorporates things like arm balances and inversions a lot earlier on than some other styles. And, the rocket name, it actually has a pretty rock and roll origin story.
Oh, I am all ears. Tell me more.
Well, Schultz was teaching a group of students, and this group included members of the Grateful Dead, and apparently Bob Weir himself actually coined the name. He said it felt like this style of yoga gets you there faster, just like a rocket.
Wow, it's amazing. I love the connection to the Grateful Dead. It definitely adds to the whole vibe of rocket yoga. But let's get back to the practice itself. You mentioned that it's based on Ashtanga yoga. What does that actually mean?
Good question. Ashtanga yoga is a very traditional style that follows a specific sequence of poses. Think of it like a set menu at a restaurant. You always get the same dishes in the same order every time. Rocket yoga kind of takes inspiration from these sequences, but it allows for more flexibility and individual modifications.
So it's more like a choose-your-own-adventure kind of yoga.
That's a great way to put it. Rocket yoga actually has three core sequences. Rocket I, 2, and 3. They're kind of like different levels, each one building upon the last. And they draw a lot from Ashtanga's primary and intermediate series, but they're just designed to be a little bit more approachable.
Okay, that makes sense. So
Yeah.
you don't have to be a super flexible pretzel-like yogi to try rocket yoga.
Not at all. That's actually one of the beautiful things about this style. It really encourages modifications based on, your individual needs and abilities. Whether you're a total beginner or a seasoned yogi, you can find a way to make the practice work for you.
That's really reassuring, especially for someone like me who's still, relatively new to yoga. Now, I know you mentioned that rocket yoga is very fast-paced and energetic, but what about the mental and spiritual aspects of yoga? Are those still present in this style?
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about moving quickly through the poses, it's also about cultivating a sense of presence and mindfulness within that flow. So you're still connecting with your breath, finding stillness within the movement and tapping into that inner peace that yoga is really known for.
Okay, so it's like finding that balance between challenge and serenity.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that while rocket yoga is often described as progressive Ashtanga, it also has this element of playfulness and fun that you might not really find in more traditional styles.
I have to admit, the idea of fun yoga really appeals to me. Sometimes I feel like yoga can be a bit too serious.
Right, and that's where Larry Schultz's personality really shines through. He was known for his humor and his really inclusive approach to teaching. He wanted to make yoga accessible and enjoyable for everyone.
So tell me more about this Larry Schultz character. He sounds fascinating.
Oh, he was a real trailblazer.
Ah.
He challenged a lot of the traditional yoga norms and made yoga more accessible to people who might have felt, intimidated by the more kind of rigid approaches. He actually used to say that yoga was for the masses, not just the elite.
I love that. It's like he democratized yoga in a way.
He really did. And his influence is still felt very much today. Rocket yoga continues to, grow in popularity because it offers this challenging yet accessible practice that's infused with this sense of joy and playfulness.
All right, I'm hooked. I'm already feeling inspired to try a rocket yoga class. But before I blast off to the nearest studio, I have to ask, what's the deal with the music? I've heard that music plays a big role in rocket yoga, which seems kind of unusual for yoga, right?
It is unique, but Schultz really believed that music could actually enhance the practice and make it even more enjoyable. And it wasn't just traditional Indian music either. He was really open to all sorts of genres, from rock and roll to electronica to, wait for it, even death metal.
Whoa, death metal yoga. That's definitely not what I was expecting. But hey, I guess it's all about finding what works for you, right?
Exactly. It's about letting go of, any preconceived notions you have about what yoga should be and just finding what resonates with you personally.
So if headbanging helps you find your zen, then go for it.
Why not? Ultimately, rocket yoga is about breaking free from limitations, both physical and mental, and just discovering your own unique path to strength, to flexibility, to inner peace.
That's such a great message. I'm definitely starting to see the appeal of this rocket yoga thing. Now, you mentioned modifications earlier. Can you give me some specific examples of how those actually work in practice?
Of course. One of the key principles of rocket yoga is that it's adaptable to all levels. So let's say, you're working on a pose like Chaturanga Dandasana, which is basically like uh, a low push-up position. If you're not quite strong enough to hold that full pose, you can actually modify it by, dropping your knees to the ground or using blocks under your hands for a little bit of extra support.
So it's like having training wheels for yoga.
Exactly. It's about meeting yourself where you are and gradually, building up your strength and your flexibility over time. And what's cool is that this emphasis on modifications really makes rocket yoga accessible to, people of all ages and abilities.
Okay, I'm really starting to understand the beauty of this approach. It takes the pressure off and allows you to progress at your own pace,
And it also encourages you to be creative and, find what works best for your own unique body. Schultz often referred to rocket yoga as kind of like the Montessori school of yoga.
Hold on, Montessori school, like the educational approach. How does that even apply to yoga?
That's a great question. Think about it this way. In Montessori schools, kids are encouraged to learn at their own pace and explore different materials in a really self-directed way.
So it's about fostering that independence and self-discovery.
Precisely. And in the context of rocket yoga, it means that the practice itself serves as a foundation from which you can then branch out and explore other styles and techniques, You're learning the building blocks, you're developing your own intuition, and just finding your own unique expression within the practice.
Wow, I'm loving this analogy. It's like rocket yoga empowers you to become your own yoga teacher in a way.
Exactly. It's all about cultivating that sense of self-awareness and finding what really, what truly resonates with you on your own yoga journey.
Okay, so we've talked about the origins, the structure, the philosophy, and the modifications, but what about the actual experience of practicing rocket yoga? What do people who actually do this style, what do they have to say about it?
I was just coming to that. We have some really incredible testimonials and personal experiences to share from rocket yoga practitioners, including some insights from David Kyle, who was actually a student of Larry Schultz himself.
Oh, wow. Let's hear what they have to say.
So one practitioner who had been practicing yoga for years described rocket yoga as like a complete game changer for them. They said it really helped them, break through these plateaus and discover this whole new level of strength and flexibility they didn't even know they had.
That's amazing. It sounds like it really pushes you to your limits, in a good way.
It does. And David Kyle really emphasizes the sense of community and fun that's fostered, within rocket yoga classes. He says that the energy is really contagious and that people just leave class feeling so energized and, inspired and connected.
So it's not just a physical practice, it's a social one too.
Absolutely. And here's where it gets really interesting. One practitioner even said that it felt like rocket yoga was almost like, designed specifically for them. They loved how it incorporated, their favorite music and how it just made them, feel good in their body.
Okay, that's pretty cool. It's like having a personalized yoga experience. So for someone who's like totally new to rocket yoga, what's the best way to get started?
The best way is honestly to just try a class, experience the energy, the flow, the music, and just see how it feels in your own body. And if you're looking for more guidance, David Kyle has written a really excellent book called Rocket Yoga, Your Guide to Progressive Ashtanga Vinyasa. It kind of delves into the practice in more detail. Of course, we'll have a link to that in the show notes for you.
Perfect. I'm definitely going to check that out. This has been such an incredible introduction to rocket yoga. I feel like I've gone from like zero to rocket scientist in just a few minutes.
Well, maybe not a rocket scientist, but you've definitely got a solid grasp of the fundamentals now. And, the journey is just beginning.
Speaking of which, we still have so much more to explore. Next up, we're going to delve a little deeper into Larry Schultz's very unique teaching style and uncover some of the criticisms and controversies surrounding rocket yoga. It's gonna be fascinating. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground on rocket yoga, but like you said, the journey's just beginning. It's funny, before we started this deep dive, I had this idea that yoga was all about like, peace and tranquility.
Mm.
And while that's definitely part of it, rocket yoga seems to have like this rebellious streak.
That's a great observation, and it's one of the things that makes this style so intriguing. Remember, Larry Schultz was all about challenging the status quo
Mhm.
and making yoga accessible to everyone. But as you can imagine, his innovations didn't always sit well with the more traditional yoga community.
Yeah, you mentioned some criticisms and controversies surrounding rocket yoga. What are those about exactly?
Well, some traditionalists argue that by deviating from that set sequence of Ashtanga yoga, Schultz kind of disrupted the intended energetic effects of the practice. They believe that, the order of the poses is actually crucial for like creating a specific flow of energy in the body.
So it's not just about the physical poses themselves, but also about the energetic flow.
Exactly. And for those who adhere very strictly to those traditional lineages of Ashtanga, any changes to the sequence are seen as diluting the purity of the practice.
That's interesting. It's like there's a whole other layer to yoga that I'm just starting to understand. But honestly, the idea of like sticking to a rigid sequence, it sounds a bit intimidating to me.
Yeah, I can see how it could feel that way, and that's one of the reasons why rocket yoga resonated with so many people. It offered this more flexible and adaptable approach that felt, less dogmatic.
Right. But were there any other concerns besides like the sequencing?
Yeah, some critics also worry that the emphasis on, speed and accessibility in rocket yoga could lead to like improper form and potential injuries if students aren't practicing mindfully.
That makes sense. I guess if you're moving really quickly through the poses, it's easier to lose track of your alignment and proper technique.
Precisely. And this is really where the role of the teacher becomes absolutely crucial. A good rocket yoga teacher will really emphasize, proper alignment and modifications, especially for beginners, and they'll encourage students to really listen to their bodies and not push themselves beyond their limits.
So it's not just about going like full speed ahead.
Yeah.
There's still need for that inner awareness and discipline.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance between challenge and ease, you
Oh.
know? You're pushing your boundaries while also respecting, your body's limitations.
It's like finding that sweet spot between like, pushing the gas pedal and hitting the brakes. You need both for a safe and enjoyable ride.
Exactly. And, this reminds me of something we touched on earlier, that sense of playfulness and joy that really permeates rocket yoga. It's not about, taking yourself too seriously or striving for some like, unattainable ideal of perfection.
Yeah, I'm really starting to appreciate that aspect of rocket yoga.
Yeah.
It feels like a lot more approachable and less intimidating than some of the other yoga styles I've encountered.
And that was Larry Schultz's intention all along.
Yeah.
He wanted to create a style that was accessible and enjoyable for everyone, regardless of their experience level or physical abilities.
So it's not just about like the poses themselves, but also about the attitude and the mindset you bring to the practice.
Precisely. And Schultz's unique teaching style played a huge role in shaping that culture of, inclusivity and playfulness. He was known for his humor, his kind of unconventional approach, and his ability to, really make students feel comfortable and empowered.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that he challenged those traditional yoga norms. Can you give me like some specific examples of how he did that?
Sure. One of the things that really set Schultz apart was his willingness to break free from that kind of rigid hierarchy of poses that often exists in, traditional yoga. He really believed that, everyone should have access to the benefits of yoga, regardless of their, physical limitations. So he encouraged students to modify poses and find variations that worked for their bodies.
That's so refreshing. It's like he was saying, forget the rules, just find what feels good.
That's a great way to put it. He was all about empowering students to find their own expression within the practice. And he wasn't afraid to inject, some humor and lightheartedness into the mix.
Can you share a specific anecdote that illustrates his sense of humor? I'd love to get a glimpse into his personality.
Absolutely. There's this famous story about Schultz teaching a workshop, and he noticed that one of the students was struggling to keep up with the fast-paced sequence, and instead of correcting the student or making them feel self-conscious, he simply said, hey, if you're going to fall out of the pose, at least make it look interesting.
Uh-huh. That's hilarious. I can just imagine the students' like relief and how that comment probably just eased the tension in the room.
Exactly. He had a way of disarming people with his humor and making them feel, comfortable enough to let go of their inhibitions and just, enjoy the practice.
Yeah, it sounds like he was a truly gifted teacher.
Hmm.
And I see how his personality and his teaching style would have attracted people to Rocket Yoga.
He definitely had a magnetic presence, and his legacy continues to inspire rocket yoga teachers all around the world. They strive to create that same, welcoming and inclusive environment where students feel encouraged to explore their potential, to have fun, and just, find their own unique expression within the practice.
So it's not just about mastering the poses, but it's uh, about cultivating a certain spirit, a certain attitude.
Precisely. It's about embracing the challenge,
Yeah.
having fun and not taking yourself too seriously. And I think that's a message that resonates with a lot of people, especially in today's, fast-paced and often really stressful world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Sometimes you just need to like let loose, crank up the music, and find that inner rocket fuel.
Exactly. And that's what rocket yoga is all about.
So we've explored some of those criticisms and controversies surrounding rocket yoga, but it seems like, like the benefits and the positive experiences kind of outweigh the negative. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's important to acknowledge that anytime you have a practice that, that challenges the status quo, you're going to have some pushback. And rocket yoga definitely, disrupted the traditional yoga landscape. But ultimately, I think its popularity speaks for itself. People are drawn to its accessibility, to its energy, and its, sense of fun.
It's like rocket yoga opened up the world of yoga to a whole new audience.
Absolutely. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
What else is there to uncover in this rocket yoga deep dive?
Well, we've talked a lot about the physical and energetic aspects of rocket yoga, but I think it's worth exploring, the philosophical underpinnings of this style. What are the core principles and beliefs that really drive this practice, and how does it connect to, that broader yogic tradition? We'll delve into those questions and more after a quick break.
All right, so we talked about those the physical and energetic aspects of
Yeah.
Bhakti yoga, but you mentioned something about the philosophical underpinnings of the style. I'm kind of curious to know more about that. What are the core principles and beliefs that drive this practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's an important one because, at its heart, rocket yoga it's more than just, a set of poses or a workout. It's really a philosophy. It's a way of approaching, life with this sense of playfulness, curiosity, and just a willingness you know, to push boundaries.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for me. How does the yoga style become a whole philosophy?
Well, think back to what we've learned about Larry Schultz. He was a bit of a rebel, right? He wasn't afraid to kind of challenge those traditional yoga norms and make yoga, more accessible and more enjoyable for everyone. And that spirit of, inclusivity and accessibility, that's woven into the very fabric of rocket yoga.
Right. He wanted yoga to be for the masses, not just the elite.
Exactly. And that idea is reflected in one of the core principles of rocket yoga, the
Mm.
belief that everyone is really capable of achieving great things if they're just willing to put in the effort and have fun along the way.
So it's not about being perfect or achieving some unattainable ideal.
Not at all. It's about embracing that journey, the process of learning and growing. Remember how Schultz used to say, if you're going to fall out of a pose, at least make it look interesting.
That's right. He definitely had a knack for encouraging people to, let go of their inhibitions and just enjoy the ride.
And that's a key part of the rocket yoga philosophy. It's about finding joy in the practice, even when it's challenging. It's about celebrating your successes, no matter how big or small, and just, learning from your mistakes along the way.
That reminds me of something we were talking about earlier, the idea that rocket yoga can be seen as like the Montessori school of yoga.
Yes. And that analogy really ties into, the philosophical underpinnings of this style. Remember, in Montessori education, kids are really encouraged to explore and learn. at their own pace, right?
Right. It's all about fostering, independence and self-discovery.
Exactly. And in rocket yoga, you're encouraged to do the same thing. You're given the tools and the guidance, but ultimately it's up to you to find what works best for your body and your practice.
So it's about, empowering yourself to become your own teacher in a way.
Precisely. And that's a really powerful concept, right? It's about cultivating that inner awareness and trusting your own intuition.
It is powerful. And it seems like that philosophy kind of extends beyond the yoga mat as well.
Absolutely. The principles of, playfulness and perseverance, self-discovery that you cultivate in rocket yoga, those can really be applied to all aspects of your life.
So it's like taking that rocket yoga mindset and applying it to your career, to your relationships, to your personal goal.
Exactly. It's about approaching it, approaching everything with that same sense of curiosity, determination, and joy.
Okay, I'm really starting to see, the bigger picture here. Rocket yoga it's more than just a physical practice. It's like a whole way of life.
That's a great way to put it. And it's a way of life that can be, incredibly empowering and transformative.
Well, you've definitely given me a lot to think about. I feel like I've gained, a whole new appreciation for rocket yoga and what it represents.
I'm glad to hear that. And, as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's worth circling back to something we touched on earlier, this idea that rocket yoga can be, it can be a bit controversial.
Right. We talked about those criticisms from traditionalists who felt that Schultz was like, diluting the purity of Ashtanga yoga.
Exactly. But I think it's important to remember that, yoga it's a living tradition. It's constantly evolving and adapting.
And rocket yoga is like, a perfect example of that evolution.
Or it is. And while it may not be for everyone, it's undeniable that rocket yoga has really played a significant role in making yoga, more accessible and more appealing to a much wider audience.
I think that's a great point to end on. Rocket yoga, with its blend of tradition and innovation, it's helped to kind of break down those barriers and open up the world of yoga to people who might have never even considered it before.
And ultimately, isn't that what yoga is all about, Connecting with yourself, finding your own path, and embracing the journey.
Beautifully said. I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the origins of rocket yoga to its, philosophical underpinnings we've explored, like the many facets of this really dynamic and transformative practice.
And I hope this deep dive has, inspired you to explore rocket yoga a little bit further and maybe even try a class for yourself.
I know, I'm definitely going to check it out. Who knows? Maybe I'll even find myself, headbanging in downward dog one day.
Hey, why not? Remember, it's all about finding what works for you and having fun along the way.
That's right. Thanks for joining me on this rocket yoga journey. It's been a blast.
The pleasure was all mine. Until next time, keep exploring and keep reaching for the stars.